This is a huge phone. But that design and that color. Alright, roll the intro. So this is the iPhone 12 Pro Max. It's one of the 4 iPhones that Apple has released this year. And the main motto behind this iPhone is basically more everything. Bigger camera sensor, bigger battery, biggest screen on an iPhone. It's supposed to be the most grand iPhone Apple has ever made. So let's jump right into the main features as to why I got this iPhone. Let's start with the first important feature. And that's this guy here, the cameras. Now the iPhone 12 Pro basically has your typical 3 camera array. You have the wide camera, the telephoto camera, and the ultra wide camera. Now of course when you're going to be looking at this Pro camera system, you're probably going to wonder what's the difference between the 12 and the 12 Pro. So for beginners, the ultra wide camera is pretty much the same on both of these phones. So we're going to look at that a little later. We're going to start off with the wide camera and the tele camera because that's where most of the main differences lie. Starting with the wide camera, according to me that's the most important camera on any of these iPhones. The wide camera basically has a newer lens. It's a 7-element design and has an f1.6 aperture on it, which is a pretty great deal because that basically improves your low light performance. Also, the difference between the iPhone 12 Pro and the Pro Max is that the Pro Max now has a larger sensor, which basically means you're going to get all the benefits of that bigger sensor size, which if you think about is better low light performance and better bokeh or background blur, overall better image quality in various lighting situations, which is a pretty great deal because Apple's always pushed their software side of things. I mean, they've always had a pretty standard camera system. Well, this year it's a little different. Apple chose to upgrade the hardware on the larger phone. This year, even the stabilization's a lot different only on this phone. So basically what Apple calls it is sensor shift stabilization, which in simple words is in-body image stabilization, which is what you have on bigger cameras by Canon and Fujifilm, where instead of having only a stabilized lens, you also have the sensor that actually moves and it basically opposes any jerky motion that you may have when you're shooting handheld. I think this is a pretty big game changer when it comes to like any smartphones because sensor shift stabilization is a lot better than just optical image stabilization or electronic stabilization, where basically you have different modes of stabilization working together so that you get the most smoothest image possible. Now, another major benefit of having a larger sensor under the wide lens is basically the fact that you can now have better low light performance like I mentioned before. What does that basically mean? It means when you are shooting in darker environments, you tend to lower the shutter speed or crank up the ISO. On smartphones, you don't really get a lot of manual controls, but on this phone, its native ISO goes up to 7000, which is a lot larger and greater than any of the other iPhones ever. In fact, it's higher than a lot of phones out there in the market today, and I think that is going to be phenomenal for anybody who wants to primarily shoot on their smartphone, whether it's photographs or video. Okay, I'm going to be brutally honest. You're only going to see a difference though between this camera and the 11 Pro's camera if you actually pixel peep and get into it. Because under most conditions, in normal light and bright lights, most smartphones today will produce the exact same results. I think Apple's way ahead of the pack when it comes to low light right now. But other than that, and if you don't go out and shoot in dim lighting and you don't care about low light photographs, you're not really going to see too much of a difference. Now, I'm going to put up a couple of photographs, sample photos rather, that I actually shot on the iPhone 12 Pro Max and a couple of other phones, including my older iPhones that I have lying around in the house. And I want you guys to take a look at them and tell me what you guys actually think. Leave a comment in the comment sections. Do you actually see a difference? I know I do, but do you? That's what's important. Now, this little guy over here. This is the Lidar Sensor, which we've talked about before in my iPad Pro review. I'm going to leave a link in the description to give you a little bit more of a brief on what Lidar is. I don't think Lidar has actually reached its peak. It can be phenomenal if you really look at it and you look at the technology, but I don't think Apple has pushed it as hard as they could. But it's on these iPhones. It's not on the 12. It's not on the 12 mini. It's only on the Pro models. And it does give you a little bit of benefit when it comes to low light and autofocus, and slightly more benefits when it comes to performance of your camera. But other than that, it's not that great. Okay. So next we're looking at this guy here, which is the telephoto lens. Now the telephoto lens for me is more of a mixed bag. The telephoto lens has the longer focal length rather, which is a 65mm lens now. And that's pretty great when you compare it to the 12 Pro or the 11 Pro Max, which only had a 52mm. So you get a little bit more zoom range, which is fantastic, especially when you're shooting in great light. But on the downside, the aperture is not as wide as what it used to be. Now you have an f2.2 as compared to an f2.0, which is what you have on the 12 Pro. When you pick up the telephoto lens and you actually shoot in bright light, it's not going to make too much of a difference to you. But when you use this exact same lens and compare it to an older iPhone in low light, this lens is not going to absorb as much light as the others did, which basically means the images are not going to be as sharp, the photographs are not going to be as great. Apple should have kept the same f2.0 and maintained the focal length if they could in any particular way, and that would have been fantastic. Having an extra zoom read during bright light is pretty great, and I'm not going to complain about that. But hopefully on the iPhone 13 they're going to come up with a wider aperture on this camera, and that'll be pretty great. So now another feature that I'm really excited about is Apple Pro RAW. Apple Pro RAW is a new image format that Apple introduced this year, and I think it's going to be one of those features that's going to change the entire sphere of smartphone photography out there. Now, when you shoot on your smartphone, you're basically shooting JPEG files, right? Your smartphone will basically take a number of pictures, it'll apply its computational photography magic using its processors, and it's going to give you a photograph that's basically already got its colors and all the highlights and shadows, the computational magic baked in, and that's what you get. So when you pick up that photograph and you take it to your editing app, you'll see that you cannot make much of a difference with it. Now, another format that people normally shoot on DSLR and mirrorless cameras is RAW. When you're shooting RAW, basically you get a lot of flexibility. You get a large amount of data, the size of the image is a lot bigger, and you can take that into your editing app and you can actually tune the image to the way you want. Now, what you lose when you're shooting RAW on a smartphone is basically you lose the computational magic. So what Apple has done is they've created a new format known as Apple Pro RAW, which basically gives you all the magic from the computational photography that happens on the chip, and you get a fantastic image, and you also get the amount of data that you would have on a RAW file. So you can actually take that image and still fine tune it to the way you like it. So you can basically apply your touch to the photograph and you're still going to get a lot of data to work with, which I think is pretty great. Apple Pro RAW isn't here yet. It's going to come out maybe in the next iOS update, I think 14.2 or 14.3, I'm not very sure about that. But when Apple Pro RAW does come out, I will take a video where I go out shooting street with my iPhone and I'm going to test it out and I'm going to tell you how it is after I run it through my editor. But it's a feature that I'm extremely excited about. Now, another thing Apple's done this year with the cameras is basically they've given you night mode across the board, which basically means every camera on your phone now is night mode enabled, including the camera in front of your phone, which is basically the selfie camera. They also have night mode portraits, which is pretty cool. To be able to understand depth of field on a smartphone at night is pretty amazing. So I have put up a couple of sample pictures. It's not perfect, it has its glitches, but I think in the future it's going to be pretty great as the software keeps rolling out and keeps improving. Moving on to my favorite part of these cameras, which is video. The iPhone has always shot fantastic video. It still shoots 4K at 24, 30, 60 frames per second, and the iPhones were always ahead of the pack when it came to video. This year we have Dolby Vision HDR on the iPhone, which is amazing. Now, Dolby Vision HDR is just another format of HDR, but the iPhones are the first phones in the market that actually have Dolby Vision HDR. If you're not somebody who actually sits down to edit their videos, and you're not somebody who actually cares about editing their videos, you're probably not going to use Dolby Vision HDR. As a matter of fact, you're not going to like it either, because the problem with Dolby Vision HDR is that you can only play it and it can only be seen on certain screens that understand this format. So now when you upload a video in HDR on YouTube, if somebody's watching that video on a screen or on a phone that doesn't support this format, it's not going to look good. But for people who are actually interested, if you're a mobile videographer, this feature is absolutely brilliant, because the amount of colors and highlights and shadows and the amount of fine-tuning and tweaking that you can do by shooting in Dolby Vision HDR and the image that you can actually produce out of a smartphone in 2020 is mind-blowing. Not going to be disappointed with what this camera can produce. Like I said, the iPhones in terms of video have always been ahead of the pack, and this year with the faster lens, the bigger sensor, they are still ahead of the pack when it comes to video. Now, I have used Dolby Vision HDR and I've shot on it and I think it's great, but the fact of the matter is that I haven't learned how to edit it yet, because the workflow is pretty insane and there's not a lot of editing programs that even support the workflow yet. You can edit this on your iPhone and iMovie, and I do know how to do it, and I will put out a video about that in the near future. The fun part about this is the fact that now that Apple's implemented Dolby Vision HDR, there are going to be a lot more devices that come out in the future that will support HDR playback, which I think is pretty great. Platforms like YouTube out there to actually support Dolby Vision, and that basically means you can get stunning videos and photographs out of this little device, and you can watch them absolutely anywhere, and it'll be so much easier to create content. So the iPhones also come with something known as night lapse. It's pretty great, and it is a feature that I'm extremely excited about. To conclude on the camera front, I do think that the iPhone 12 Pro Max is great. It is one of the most confident and best smartphones in the market when it comes to mobile photography and mobile videography. I love it and I'm going to continue to use it, but for the regular consumer, you're only going to see a difference between this and the 11 Pro or 12, as a matter of fact, if you really want to see it, if you're really interested in these features. Now I want to quickly jump into this screen. It's an OLED screen, and these screens are way better than what we had in the 11 series of iPhones that came out last year with OLED. It's also called the Pro Display XDR, which is Apple's fancy ways of saying it's a great OLED screen. Overall, the screen on the 12 Pro Max is massive. It's fantastic to be able to watch content on this. I mean, I've been watching a lot of anime and a lot of TV shows on this screen. This phone is big. The screen is big, and after a certain point, you're going to feel it in your hand. So you may want to go to a store, pick up the demo version, and then make a choice of whether you want to buy it or not. Now, the only downside with this screen that I can actually point out is the lack of 120 Hz. For a phone of this price, this screen only comes with 60 Hz, a little bit of a bummer. But to be completely honest, I've come from the 11 Pro and I've moved on to the 12 Pro Max, so I don't miss the 120 Hz that much, but I know this is a downside, and a lot of users out there are going to want that flagship feature on this flagship phone, and you don't have it, and I hope next year Apple actually implements it on the iPhone 30. The build quality on these iPhones are great. The new series, the new design, I love it. the squared edges. Other than that, the Pro Max comes with slightly better speakers than any of the other iPhones in the market. The bass is a little bit richer, but again, that's a perspective. It's person to person. Yes, we all saw Apple market the life out of 5G on stage during the iPhone launch, and it is the future. But that's not the reason why you buy this iPhone, because here in India 5G is really not a thing yet, and I don't think it's going to be a great deal for the next year at least. Now with any flagship phone, the one major reason to upgrade is the new processor. That's extremely important because your processor is going to show you the longevity of your phone, and the A14 is what we have on the iPhone 12 Pro Max. This processor is an absolute beast. You can edit 4K video on this. As a matter of fact, you can edit 5K video, which you can't do on like 90% of the computers in the market nowadays. So the A14 is a complete beast, and you're not going to be disappointed. The phone is snappy. It comes with 6 gigs of RAM. Overall, it's nothing short of what you would expect from a flagship. Battery life on the iPhone 12 Pro Max is pretty great as well. It's a smaller battery in size when you compare it to the iPhone 11 Pro Max, but because you have the new A14 processor inside this phone, the battery life is pretty much the same. I get about a day of use every time I use this phone without any issue. Now to sum things up, I'm going to be completely honest with you. All the iPhones that were released this year are very, very similar to each other, except for the 12 Pro Max. But when it comes to the 12 Pro Max and the 12 Pro, when you compare the two together, very, very similar. There are differences in the hardware. There is a better camera module and there's a bigger screen size, but other than that, you're not going to find too much of a difference between the 12 Pro and the 12 Pro Max. So if you really want the best iPhone out there, and you want the best camera system on an iPhone, or you want the largest battery on the iPhone, or the largest screen that you can get, this is the phone that you want to buy. But other than that, there's absolutely no reason for you to go out there and pick up the iPhone 12 Pro Max. I love it. I'm an Apple fan, and I always choose to go for the best iPhone that I can. I picked up the 12 Pro Max in the 512GB variant, which is insanely expensive in India. The prices actually go up to $1.5 lakh. That's a personal choice that you're going to make. If you have the money to blow, go ahead. You're not going to be disappointed with the 12 Pro Max. But if you care about any of the other features that I mentioned earlier before, this is the phone that you want to get. It is the best, it is the biggest, it is the most powerful iPhone that they have ever made. Thanks for watching another episode of Essential Tech. If you learned anything today, and if you enjoyed this video, definitely hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification, and give this video a like. Tell me what you guys think, and I'm going to see you guys in the next one. Peace.